Abby and her Aunt Frances walk hand in hand to the Boston Harbor Rowing Club to attend a wedding. Frances loves weddings, and Abby must really love work to bring it along to the celebration. She casually explains she just likes to be prepared and hands over Frances to an usher, giving him specific instructions of where she'd like her dear aunt to be seated. Abby is supposed to meet up with her lover Scott. The meeting never happens though because he breaks up with her through a text. The text complains that she's too closed off. The breakup has Abby in a damper mood during the reception. The groom toasts to love, a concept that seems so far from Abby at the moment. Frances comes with words of encouragement, trying to assure Abby she's not the problem. It doesn't feel that way when she looks at the complaints from her exes. It's not the first time she's been told she's closed off or something similar. Frances reveals her brother, Abby's father, kept his spirit up with a paper and a pen. She gets an idea and asks Abby to pull out writing materials from the work stuff she's carried along. What Frances wants is for Abby to bleed on the paper, becoming an open wound. Abby isn't interested, but Frances insists that writing down her feelings and passions will help. When she's done with the letter, she'll put it in a bottle and throw it out into the sea. It sounds too dramatic, but Frances believes it wouldn't hurt. Abby goes to a corner and fights the urge to turn back because she feels silly. After a deep breath, she begins to write to a potential true love out there, expressing she's misunderstood but she knows she's a good person. A hard worker and obsessed with pancakes. Her last paragraph of the letter expresses her search for something real and without judgment. She's not looking for someone perfect, but someone who can be open as she's willing to do the same. When she's done, she rolls up the paper and inserts it in the bottle. A part of her feels she's lost her mind, but the other part has her swinging her arm over the harbor, tossing the bottle into the water. Abby resumes work at Everson Valley Farm. Elaine greets her with news that Everson is going public, and it's Abby's chance to get noticed and promoted by the CEO. Sophie and Kevin approach the pair, their co-workers, and an engaged couple looking for a new venue for their upcoming wedding ceremony. Abby gives her review on Rowing Club, and Sophie checks them out. When they're alone again, Elaine asks about Scott, and Abby breaks the news to her, narrating her bizarre behavior courtesy of Aunt Frances. Elaine does know Abby to be closed off, and is shocked to learn Abby took the bold step to open up like that. What's done is done, and Abby is convinced her letter is lost at sea. 3 months later, Abby is working towards that promotion. Mr. Everson has given her the task of sourcing out a business the corporation can acquire and add to its portfolio before they go public. Sophie steps in to remind her dad he can't be out in the field due to his health. She'd love to be Abby's partner, but has her plate full with the upcoming wedding. Abby is fine working alone. She's already impressed Mr. Everson with her organizational skills. In Abby's absence, father and daughter scheme. Mr. Everson has a son named Nick, who he wishes was more like Abby. Nick has always distanced himself from the family business, and it irks Mr. Everson. Sophie infers Nick is doing quite well on his own, but Mr. Everson would prefer he's involved in the family business. Sophie gets an idea. She knows Nick would dread working full-time for the company, but she's sure they can get him on a short-term assignment, something to pique his interest. Abby's bottle drifts ashore, and Nick discovers it just as Sophie calls him. She plays her cards and it takes some convincing, but Nick agrees to leave his solitary life in the wilderness, come see his sister before the wedding, get to know her fiancé better, and assist the company on a short-term project. No strings attached. He starts to pack a bag when he gets a call from his dad. Distracted, Nick doesn't notice Abby's bottle slipping into his suitcase as he steps out of his trailer home. Abby is having leisure time when she gets a text about a meeting with Mr. Everson on Monday morning. Nick gets a similar text shortly after he arrives in Boston. Monday morning comes, and Nick has kept both Mr. Everson and Abby waiting. Abby takes some time to register that Mr. Everson wants her to play teammate. He infers there's a lot of work on ground, and he can't personally assist. While Abby has built her reputation as the company's top analyst, Nick establishes he's a wanderer with minimum company experience. Mr. Everson thinks this will be an interesting collaboration, but that side-eye from Abby begs to differ. At home, Abby expresses her displeasure to Frances. She feels she can handle the project alone, and from what she's heard about Nick, he's only going to slow her down. Frances advises her to make the best of the situation, and Abby agrees. She mentions she'll need to become captain of this rocky boat, and goes straight to her room to email Nick. They have a meeting with business owners the following day, and Abby wants Nick extensively prepared for it. Nick is having quality time with Sophie, tasting beer and eating pizza. He prides himself as a people reader, and Abby comes off uptight and controlling. Sophie remarks Abby is an excellent worker, and Nick shouldn't be too quick to judge her. Abby's email drops, solidifying Nick's opinion of her. She's an extra reason to be weary about working for the company, an experience he insists will be short-term as discussed. Once he's done with the project, he's leaving Boston. Sophie remarks if he has to leave, then she's at least happy they have him over in the meantime. While he's unpacking his suitcase, Nick finds Abby's bottle and decides to read the letter in it for the first time. The letter doesn't reveal Abby's identity, but she did leave an email address that has her initials and her hometown. The hometown makes Nick aware that this mystery woman waiting for true love is there in Boston. Abby and Francis are chattering over dishes, talking about work and Nick. The conversation switches gears when Abby receives mail from an address with the domain name, realtraveler.com. Real Traveler explains he's found her letter, and Abby is lost for words. Abby might be frightened, but Francis sees an adventure she wants her niece to take. Real Traveler comes off as friendly, polite, and intrigued by her letter, wanting to keep in touch via email. Late at night, Abby summons the courage to write back. Her response is short and shy, explaining it was an embarrassing thing she was pushed to do, but she's glad that her letter is in safe hands. Nick is wide awake when the message drops and responds right away. They chat back to back. Nick likes Abby's openness, and Abby learns Real Traveler is a guy, but Abby ghosts him the minute Real Traveler asks if she's found her person. Elaine convinces Abby to loosen up and text Real Traveler back. He might be far from what she's looking for, but he might be exactly what she's looking for. To find out, she'd need to stop overthinking things and give him a chance. The mood changes when Nick shows up. They have a business to assess, and their polar opposite personalities start to clash. Abby acts like a know-it-all big sister, and Nick is the rebellious little brother who wishes she was less insufferable. They're butting heads about how to go about assessing the business. Nick is unconventional, friendly, and ready to mingle with the employees, while Abby wants to rely on bookkeeping, charts, and statistical data to get the job done. She's also temperamental, and gives Nick the option to do things his way, keeping out of her way. Nick partakes in the employee event, helping them taste ice cream flavors and decide a winner. Meanwhile, Abby has her nose deep in the bookkeeping, trying not to get distracted by the noise. Teammates are still butting heads when they report back to Mr. Everson. Nick feels the business's product is worth taking the risk for, but Abby is more concerned about their financial records. Mr. Everson validates their different views, but he's hoping for a more recognized business to acquire and add to the company's portfolio. He reminds them they have limited time, and he wouldn't want it wasted on their differences. Abby complains to Elaine how hard it is to work with Nick. She's especially exhausted knowing they have to keep working together until they find the right business for the portfolio. As for her personal life, there's been no word on Real Traveler, and she believes it's for the best. She sends Nick a text to prep him for their next meeting. Nick receives her text with a heavy sigh and an eye roll. He starts to question why he came back, and Abby's letter captures his eye like a needed response, prompting him to email her. Over several days, Real Traveler and ML Beantown get to know more about themselves. They're both single and age 36. Real Traveler found her letter on a beach shore in Maine and hasn't settled anywhere long enough to call it home. For Abby, home is Boston. She's an only child, and her closest family is Francis. Real Traveler has a sister he adores. He'd like to get a dog, but when he's more settled. Abby loves dogs too, but prefers older ones that are waiting to find love again. Time moves quickly, and Abby knows it all too well. Still, she and Real Traveler manage to find moments to write to each other regularly, fitting their letters into the rhythm of their daily lives. Real Traveler shares his struggles at work, dealing with a difficult coworker and a boss who's hard to please. In her reply, Abby offers practical advice, encouraging him to focus on doing his job efficiently and staying consistent. No matter what happens, she reminds him, he could take pride in his efforts. At work the following day, Abby gushes to Elaine about her budding relationship. On the other hand, Nick took his pen pal's advice and is giving work his best. He opens up to Sophie about meeting someone he really likes. She ticks several boxes, and Sophie likes the sound of her. Their conversation is cut short when Nick realizes he's messed up. He's prepped for the meeting, and he's early to the office, but he was supposed to meet up with Abby in the lobby. He catches up with an irritated Abby and explains himself. Luckily, he's prepped for the meeting, and this makes her less annoyed with him. Harbor Coffee Works meets their criteria, but it's also an attractive business, so they'll need to give their best pitch to win the owner over. During their meeting with Stan, Harbor Coffee Works owner, Nick takes the lead and successfully captures Stan's attention with a great pitch. Stan is on board, and Nick promises he's made the right decision. However, Nick's effort goes down the drain when he comments on Stan's phone wallpaper. It's unprofessional and sensitive, and there's no salvaging the situation. Stan adjourns their meeting and walks off. Things are on edge back at Mr. Everson's office. Stan is still unreceptive, and Mr. Everson doesn't have time to appease him. What pisses Everson off is Nick's unapologetic attitude. He's disappointed in his son for screwing up something he should have been good at. Abby feels bad about the tension between Everson and Nick and decides to make an effort to improve her relationship with Nick. Her willingness to connect encourages him to open up about his struggles, admitting he doesn't feel like he fits in with the company the way his dad expects him to. His spontaneity and openness stand in sharp contrast to Abby's more measured nature, and she admits she admires those qualities in him. Though it's not her usual way, she's open to learning. Sensing an opportunity, Nick takes it upon himself to teach her. They go to a shelter to look at dogs. Nick points out an older dog he'd like to adopt if he were ready. He's accustomed to the concept of a second chance at love. Everyone deserves it, including dogs. Thinking about it, Nick does want to be involved in the family business and is even willing to go big with the project at hand. Abby is game and gets to work. Wilmore Estates is a game changer. The owner is notoriously known for turning down buyers, and getting him to sell will be a big win. Nick and Abby are on the same page and ready to get busy. Abby hands over to Nick a list of other businesses they have meetings with, while she tries to set up a meeting with the big fish. Sophie notices Nick looks upbeat. He's suddenly passionate about the project and looking forward to taking similar risks in his personal life. He gets back to his office and takes a bold step. Abby is trying to book that meeting with George Wilmore when she receives an email from Real Traveler stating he's currently working on a project in Boston and would like to meet her. Abby updates her aunt, who's thrilled on her behalf. Abby assumed Real Traveler lived in Maine because it's where he found her letter. A long-distance relationship seemed like a safe fantasy, but Frances reminds Abby that she's requested for something real in her letter, and here's an opportunity to get it. With that, Abby texts Real Traveler back that she'd love to meet him. They set their meeting for the following day. Both ends are excited about seeing each other. They're both oblivious to each other at work the next day, texting and finalizing things for their meeting at 7 that evening. Nick spots Abby before she leaves the office. She's wearing white gloves, just like ML Beantown said she would for their date. Abby calls him to hand over the list of companies to Sophie, and that's when things start to make sense. ML Beantown and Abby have the same handwriting. The last straw is the initials on the paper, ML. An oblivious Sophie explains that Abby's full name is Mary Abigail Lawrence. He starts to freak out, and Sophie can barely get him to calm down. Ultimately, he decides to stand her up because he's not ready to face this plot twist. Back at home, Nick struggles to wrap his head around the fact that ML Beantown and Abby Lawrence are the same person. One part of her letter sticks with him, the idea of people having layers. It gnaws at him, stirring a mix of curiosity and guilt. He can't help but feel bad for standing her up. Abby blocks Real Traveler at the office the next day. Seeing Abby in a damper mood has Nick double texting. But of course, Abby blocked him, so his message bounces back. He goes to her office with coffee and donuts, but it does little to brighten her mood. Wilmore declined a meeting, and coupled with her earlier disappointment, she's done taking risks. There's a business they can pursue, but there's no challenge there, nor isn't as recognizable as Everson would prefer. Nick feels she's giving up on their initial goal, but at this point, Abby is tired and believes something is better than nothing. Nick lets the conversation be. Back at his office, he gets to work on George Wilmore. Reading through an article, he learns George loves fishing and can be found fishing in the backyard of his cidery and inn. Nick finds Abby sulking and tells her they'll stick to their plan to go big. He set up a meeting with someone named Deirdre, who works for George. Abby is still pessimistic and in doubt. Nick links her sour mood to love issues, and Abby is momentarily upset. The bottom line is that he hates that she wants to give up because that's not the Abby he's come to know. They have an opportunity to meet George Wilmore, and he's almost sure she wouldn't want to turn it down. Taking a page from her book, he asks her to chin up and prepare for their meeting. Elaine keeps Abby company while she packs an overnight bag like Nick had requested. As they talk, Abby mentions that Nick seems to have turned things around, but she's trying not to judge people too quickly after what happened with Real Traveler. Elaine, on the other hand, thinks Abby is making too much of it and feels Real Traveler deserves a chance to explain why he canceled their date. Abby wrestles with her conscience before finally giving in. She unblocks Real Traveler and expresses that she was hurt when he stood her up. Nick gets her message and promises an explanation when they meet in person. He apologizes for standing her up and says he's trying to work some things out. Dear Aunt Frances let herself into Abby's apartment on the account that she's protective and curious. She's pleasantly present when Nick comes to pick up Abby for their road trip. Before they leave, Nick mentions that they'll make a stop, promising it won't interfere with their very important meeting. Nick watches Abby fidget in the diner. She lies that she's cool with the stop, but wishes he'd explain its significance. Whatever worries and questions she has go down the drain when Nick's secret order materializes. Pancakes. Abby is on cloud 9, absent-mindedly wondering if she's ever told Nick she's obsessed with pancakes. Deirdre is a receptionist at Wilmore's Inn. While Nick had technically not lied about meeting someone who worked for Wilmore, he'd lied about Deirdre's role in connecting them directly to George Wilmore. He argues that he had to lie because Abby isn't spontaneous, nor would she have been game for winging their way to a meeting. The plan is still on, and Nick hands Abby a bag, asking her to change outfits and meet up with him. Abby comes down, dressed as a fisherman. The costume makes sense when Nick hands her the article that states where they can possibly find George. George has a large property, and it takes both Nick and Abby 3 attempts before they find him alone and fishing. Still winging it, Nick pretends they're a couple that have just stumbled upon the site. It's Abby's first time fishing, and Nick puts her through while George watches them from his corner. He mentions they're entertaining to watch. Abby has beginner's luck, striking gold on her first swing. This grabs George's attention, and he momentarily abandons his line to cheer Abby on. Nick wants to catch a fish too, but Abby has had enough and is ready to argue. George huffs because while having them has been fun, he wants his peace. He asks them to go to the cidery like Abby wants, promising he'll come there in an hour to give them a personal tour. He gives them the tour as planned, the cidery first and then the orchard. The orchard reminds Nick of his grandfather's farm. Nick proves he's got good perception and taste buds for wine tasting. Abby feels it's a good time to come clean to George, but he wants them to take a breather. Later on in the evening, he's hosting a 30th anniversary of the establishment and is open to talking to them then. George leaves them to enjoy the orchard, so Nick and Abby talk about the possible ways they can expand once they get George to sell. They agree it's a special place with a lot of opportunities. Their paperwork is in check, and they're ready to pitch. Abby remarks the change of environment has brought out a glow in Nick like he's found his true element. Nick agrees the place is nostalgic, and he feels more relaxed. They've both learned more about each other. Nick has noticed some of Abby's quirks, and Abby keeps finding new layers to Nick. They touch on Abby's internet romance. Nick came through at a time when Real Traveler let her down. Nick feels it's a sign for her to let her internet pal go. Somehow, they refrain from getting lost in personal matters. They have a party to prepare for. At the party, George gives a heartwarming speech celebrating his wife and their history and how far the estate has come. Nick spots the perfect chance. George is alone, and Abby can approach him. George asks for a dance on seeing Abby, and George comments that Abby and Nick make a nice couple, even after she clarifies that they're not together. Abby tries to bring up the agenda, but George already knows they're from an acquisition company. He knew long before he offered them a tour. His wife wants him to sell the place, but he's been putting it off. He's willing to give them a listening ear, and asks Abby to send in paperwork he'll review. In a matter of seconds, George sets a meeting with them the following day at 9 a.m. Abby and Nick dance to celebrate. Away from the party, at Abby's room door, she thanks Nick for a fulfilling trip, and Nick is happy she was receptive in the first place. At this point, they both feel a pull, but they're both hesitant to make the first move. Nick announces he should call it a night, and he does lean in, but it's for a peck on her cheek before reminding her they have a big day tomorrow. Abby retires to her room, smiling and elated. She texts Nick a good night, and he wishes her sweet dreams. Abby and Nick rehearse their pitch the following day, confident that the Wilmore estate is theirs. George shocks them by declining the offer. He's not willing to lose his legacy and its identity to a big corporation. His rejection is a hard pill to swallow because they thought they had him. Nick suggests they head back to base, but Abby knows he's better off at the estate. She gets an idea that would please both Nick and Mr. Everson. Nick catches on and is excited at the prospect. They head back inside to talk to George, this time addressing his concerns. Nick proposes that Everson Valley Farm buy the estate, with him stepping in to run it after learning the ropes from George. The idea resonates with George, who decides to call his wife to discuss it further. They did it, meaning something promising to look forward to. They gush over some of the details before they feel that pull again. Nick's face is so close to Abby's, his hand caressing her cheek. He decides it's the moment to tell her he's Real Traveler. Abby doesn't take the news well. She's offended that he knew long enough to have said something but chose to stay quiet. In his defense, it was too early. He needed time to come to terms with ML Beantown and Abby being the same person, especially with Abby being such a difficult person in the beginning. Abby doesn't take well to his excuse and decides to find her own way home. She tells Elaine she feels betrayed and conflicted by Nick because he knew all along that she was ML Beantown, but kept it to himself. This makes her question if anything they've shared is real. She hates that he put her in such a difficult position, especially since there were moments when she felt something genuine with Real Traveler, and other times when she felt a connection with Nick. Now she's unsure what to believe. Mr. Everson calls Nick and expresses his joy at a job well done. He is proud to have Nick back and involved in the family business. Nick feels it's only right to share the credit with Abby, as it was her idea in the first place. Mr. Everson also expresses his admiration for Nick's bravery in always being true to himself. Together, he and Abby have brought forward a deal that helps keep the corporation connected to its roots and humble beginnings. Nick starts learning from George, while Abby gets home in a sad mood. She's contemplating not going to Sophie and Kevin's wedding because Nick is going to be there. Frances makes her read out her letter, and after she does, Frances points out that the person in the letter is the Abby she knows. She doesn't see Abby hiding from either life or love, and insists that Abby go to the wedding and have a good time. Abby does her best to avoid Nick at the wedding. During the reception, she starts to feel down and decides she wants to head home. It's too much being in the same venue where the whole romance gone wrong journey began. A waiter hands her a note with instructions that lead her to a table, holding a letter in a bottle. The letter reveals that it's now Nick's turn to be open and vulnerable, just as Abby has been. While she's reading the letter, Nick is waiting, remorseful and hopeful to give her love like he knows she deserves. He's changed and open to growth and improvement, open to settling down. He's even adopted a dog to that effect, the same one he pointed out in the shelter. Nick is glad she was brave enough to bear herself in a letter and send it out in a bottle because it's the reason his heart is now open to love.